Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. Today, we're going to kind of touch on the lighter side of our spiritual growth, because we as human beings, we have a tendency to make everything a whole lot harder and a whole lot more serious than it needs to be. And sometimes we just have to step back and chuckle at that. Many cultures, perhaps every culture, they have the jester, they have the trickster, they have the hoaxer in their midst. And in some cultures, this person was the most spiritual, the kind of like, if you had a hierarchy of the holy people in the culture, the ones at the very top were the tricksters, were the jokesters, were the ones who saw the humor in everything. And I think the value that plays, if we can just stop and get ourselves extracted from the idea that we have to be caught up in the drama and we have to be caught up in the seriousness, and life is so difficult and it's hard, and we have to eat our bread by the sweat of our brow and bear our children in pain and all these things that we're told in Genesis. And we step back far enough and we can see the irony, we can see the humor in the situation. It makes us look at things differently. It makes us stop. It makes us pause. When I was just becoming a teenager in the early 60s, of course, Star Trek, the original series, was just coming on TV. William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and those folks. And Gene Roddenberry was writing. And in many cases, if you look at science fiction, what science fiction writers do is they take a situation that we're experiencing here on Earth today, and they project it far off into the future, into a different world, into a distant place, and then they can safely examine it from different angles. Well, sometimes they put it back in the past, they'll set it back in the past, but they use time shifting as a way to kind of bring people out of the seriousness of, hey, wait a minute, they're talking about me here today, to, well, they're talking about those people on that faraway planet. And in one episode um, that I still stays with me and I still remember, and I don't remember the title of it, but the theme of the episode was that there were two characters in this episode, two alien characters, not human like us, but two alien characters, and they looked, they were painted kind of like circus performers, and one was painted pure white on one side and pure black on the other, and the other one was painted in just the opposite manner, pure white and pure black. And these two characters were engaged in mortal combat. They had been chasing each other throughout the universe for eons in this struggle where they were trying to kill one another or harm one another. And when Captain Kirk finally said to him, well, what is your argument? Why are you trying to do this to one another? They said, well, can't you see? He's black on one side and white on the other. And the difference was which side one was black and which side one was white. So to the unaffected observer, to the crew of the Enterprise, to the Captain Kirks and those folks, these people look very much the same. They were part white, they were part black. To the people who were engaged in the seriousness of the struggle, it was completely different. One was white on one side and black on the other, and the other was just the opposite. And of course, that little setting, that little drama that they played out on TV, kind of helps us to go back and look at ourselves and say, well, what about our prejudices? What about our views? What about what we think about race and class and sexism and all those things? Are our ideas just as silly as it would seem to be on this planet far, far away a long time in the future? So the jester in society, the person who can look at something and point out the irony in it and kind of make us look at it and even make us laugh at it, plays a valuable role in our spiritual growth. I don't know if you remember the movie My Cousin Vinny. Joe Pesci and Marissa Tomei were in it, and Joe Pesci's character was from Brooklyn, and he was a real character. He drove a convertible, and he talked with a Brooklyn accent, and he wore pointed cowboy boots with steel tips on them, and a leather suit jacket, and just kind of dressed the part that the screenwriter wanted him to have. And Fred Gwynne played a deadpan serious Southern judge. You know, he was humorous in the fact that he was so serious about the role that he was playing. And Joe Pesci's character winds up defending his cousin from a murder charge in Fred Gwynne's court, and Fred Gwynne keeps telling him how he's supposed to behave and how he's supposed to dress when he's in front of this court. And of course, Joe Pesci can't seem to bring himself to do it, and every time the judge reprimands him, he just says, "You was serious about that?" You know, and it just cracks me up to this day when I hear, "You was serious about that?" I think if we could step back and look at life, and we could look at the things that we have grown up believing, the things that we have kind of used to make our lives more difficult than they need to be, and we could just look at ourselves and laugh and say, "You was serious about that?" we would lighten up a little bit. We would find that we don't have to be so hard on ourselves. There's another movie from some time back, The Hunt for Red October. Sean Connery was in it. It was a Tom Clancy novel, and of course the plot is that the Russians have built this new submarine with a new propulsion device, and it's almost impossible, if not impossible, for the listening devices that we have to detect them. And of course, then there's the American submarine that's kind of looking for them. We're trying to figure out what's going on in this movie. And the sonar operator is one of the key characters in the movie, and the sonar operator is always listening and hearing something, and there's a computer there that analyzes the sounds as they come in. And the sonar operator hears something that doesn't make sense. He's never heard it before, you know. And of course the backstory is that each submarine has a unique audio signature that once we have identified the sound, the unique sound that that particular enemy submarine or Russian submarine makes, we'll always know that that's it because the signatures are so unique. So this computer would analyze the sounds and would come back and say, well, this is the such and such a ship, or kind of identify what type of ship it was. But when it didn't know, it would come back and say seismic activity, seismic activity. So it was as if the sonar was picking up the rumbling in the very crust of the earth, and it said, this is seismic activity. So the sonar operator, of course, the way that Tom Clancy wrote the novel and the way that the screenwriter adapted it, the sonar operator is kind of like one of the key characters who helps kind of move things along, keeps the plot moving along. And he doesn't believe that everything that this computer is identifying as seismic activity is really seismic activity. So he goes back and he listens to the sound clip, and he keeps playing it over and over again, and he alters the speed, and he runs the audio through filters so he can hear different parts of it. And he finally decides that it's not seismic activity, it's machine noise. And the way he's explaining it to the captain is that the computer program that the sonar is based off of was a computer program that was designed to listen for earthquakes. And because of that, it is very biased to believe that the things that it doesn't quite understand must be seismic activity. And he didn't believe that. So he decided to listen for himself, and sure enough, discovered that it was machine noise and it was a new type of submarine. My point of all that is that the computer had a worldview. The computer had a point of view, an orientation on life. It looked at life, and it tried to look through the filter of everything was seismic activity, because that's the way it was programmed. That's the way it was brought up. That's the way it was made. And you and I and every human being alive, every one of us, is in some regards like that computer. Now, we are not oriented to believe that everything is seismic activity, but we have a worldview. We have a point of origin. We have a culture from which we have emerged. Our parents, our teachers, our grandparents, our nations, all our religions, all of these things kind of give us a baseline of the way that we're supposed to judge and look at life and label things, and the way that we're supposed to behave and the way that we're supposed to act. Now, it's very important for us to remember then that in this culture from which we have emerged, there is an extreme bias that life needs to be hard, that life is a struggle. And we expect that. We expect that. We build it into our systems. We build it into our games. We build it into everything that we do. Everything is a competition, and those who work the hardest at the competition, they get to win, you know. And you'll even see this debate going on in our society now where people are saying, well, you know, I don't think it's right that every child on the team should get a trophy just for participating. The trophies need to be reserved for those who have struggled the hardest, who have overcome. And this idea of overcoming and struggle is almost elevated to a place of worship. You know, you look at the news programs at night, and they typically close with a human interest story that tells us how some individual has worked hard, they have struggled, they have overcome, and they have risen up to some level that no one ever thought they could achieve, you know. And I call it worshiping busyness. We worship busyness in our society. So William James, who's often called the father of American psychology, William James gave some lectures at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland just before the 1900s, around 1898, I believe he was there. And the University in Scotland, in Edinburgh, they used to have a yearly conference where people would get together and they would talk about metaphysics and they would talk about spiritual things, and they would bring in the top thinkers and the top lecturers from around the world. And William James went one year, and he gave a series of lectures called The Varieties of Religious Experience. Now the book, the transcript of the lectures is available. It's got to be about 500 pages long, and to me it was fascinating, and I read it. And I was talking to somebody one time and told them that I read it, and they said, you're either a minister or a professor, because nobody in their right mind would read that book. That was their opinion. But it was fascinating fascinating to me because James started his discussion with two viewpoints, two worldviews. And now the whole purpose of his lectures was, he said, if you take dogma and creed out of the picture, instead of getting down and saying, well, this denomination believes this and that denomination believes the other, and you know, like like the arguments that you'll see in modern times about which form of baptism is the right form of baptism. Is it complete immersion, or is it pouring water over someone's head? Is it sprinkling them? Those are the kind of things that I'm discussing. I'm not saying there's anything good or bad with any of that. What I'm saying is those are the fine points. Those are the fine dogmatic points of religion that people typically get caught up in, and they struggle with those. And James said, if we take all that apart, if we take all that and we look at the experience that people have when they come to religion, what would we find? What would we find? And that's the purpose of his lectures, the varieties of religious experience. These are the kinds of experience that people have, and we can put them in categories without necessarily saying that this is this denomination or that denomination, but these are experiences that people have that are generally classified as religious experiences. And he started off by saying that he observed that there were two major worldviews or viewpoints when it came to religion. And he said one was called the healthy-minded optimists, and the other was the sick-minded pessimists. Now I have to stop right there and give you a little backstory so you understand where James was coming from. In our country, the origins of what we currently call New Thought. Now Now, a lot of people talk New Age and those things. I'm not talking New Age. There's so many definitions of that, I can't even tell you what that means. Talking New Thought, basically the kind of the crux of what New Thought belief might swing around is, if you want to have a new experience, you have to have a new thought. Excuse me, change your thinking, change your life. New thought. Ground zero for New Thought in the United States is generally attributed to be Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, P.P. Quimby, who was a clockmaker up in Maine. Now, New Thought is not new. You can trace the ideas that we study and teach in New Thought. You can trace them back to ancient times. But there was kind of an emergence in the United States around that time that generally is believed to have started with Quimby. And William James's parents were students of some of Quimby's students, the Dressers or the Evans, I'm not sure which. But anyway, the Quimby line kind of takes many paths if you did it as you would a genealogist. And one of those leads to William James's parents, and another one leads to Ernest Holmes, and another one leads to the Fillmores at Unity, another one leads to Emma Curtis Hopkins, another leads to the Brooks Sisters in Divine Science. So a lot of the denominations in the United States that you would look at and say are part of the New Thought movement, they all kind of trace their roots back to Quimby, as did James' parents. So William James was raised in an environment similar to the ones that we talk about. So he naturally identified himself with the healthy-minded optimist. You can imagine somebody else would say, well, we're healthy-minded pessimists, and you're Pollyanna optimist. You're pie in the sky kind of stuff. But nevertheless, James said, if you look at the varieties of religious experiences, they tend to fall into two categories. So one category is an optimistic category. Life is good, God is good, we're essentially good, and we're in the process of discovering that goodness more and more each day. And the other side says that, excuse me, we're broken. Human beings are broken. Mankind has fallen. We have been damaged by sin, and we are struggling because we have been damaged by sin. The optimists say, well, nope. We're struggling because we're not completely awakened yet, and we're still in the process of learning. So I want you to just stop and think about that for a moment. We have given these two worldviews. Is the glass half empty? Is the glass half full? Is life good, or is life a struggle? Our culture, predominantly our culture, believes in struggle. It was founded by people who believed in struggle. Life was supposed to be hard because we're being punished. Life is a struggle. You need to work hard. Okay? Remember the Donna Summer song in the 70s? She works hard for her money. You're supposed to work hard. Things are not supposed to be easy. In fact, if things are too easy, then you must be lazy. Something's wrong. We have this embedded mindset today in our culture that the only reason anyone is poor is because they're lazy and they don't work hard. And that's this embedded belief of life is supposed to be a struggle, and in order to get ahead, you need to struggle. No one goes back and kind of looks at the facts and says, well, is that entirely true, that the only reason that people are poor is because they're lazy? Probably some of them are poor because they're lazy, but are all of them poor because they're lazy? Or are there other things going on? So this idea that things need to be hard to be worthwhile is embedded in our culture. Just look at our sports games. Look at basketball, for example. Suppose we took the hoops in a basketball court and we lowered the hoops to 4 feet off the floor instead of the 10 feet that they are now. What do you think would happen to the game of basketball? Would anybody even go and watch the game of basketball anymore? See, our culture says there's got to be a struggle. We've got to watch these players play hard, and we've got to set up a system where only the very, very best of the players make it up to the big leagues. We start them out in grade school, and then they go to high school, and then they go to college, and then maybe they play in these kind of minor league teams. And then one day, if they work hard enough. So we have been brought up in a society that is absolutely convinced that life needs to be a struggle, and that worldview either spills over into religion or it started in religion. So that worldview then is that humanity is damaged and humanity has to struggle. And it tends to take things very, very seriously. I mean, just think about how serious things are. Adam and Eve ate the apple, and because of that, the entire human race is condemned. It's very, very serious business, you see. And what we don't realize when we're reading these things, what we don't realize is that when they were written, in many cases they were written to explain the way things are. So you can imagine a parent. A parent is riding in the car with their children, and they're driving down the street, and the police are over on the side of the street, and they've got someone in custody in the handcuffs. And they're putting them, they put their hand on your head and push you down in the car. And they're going down the street, and the children say, "Mommy, what do you suppose is going on there?" And Mommy says, "Well, honey, when those people were your age, they didn't do their homework, and look what happened to them." So we do this as adults. We kind of go back and we try to explain things after the fact. You can imagine, Rocco Errico tells us this with regards to stories like Sodom and Gomorrah. People walking down the road and they're passing these ruins, and I wonder what happened to the people who lived there. And then they project onto those ruins. They project their story. Why is it that we have to work so hard to grow our food? Well, because people didn't listen to God. So you should listen to God. So we have to consider that in some cases these stories were written by way of explanation, and to explain in a manner that kind of instilled a value into the listener, into the children, or into the students. And that value is one of struggle. That value is one of hardship. If you move to a different part of the world, if you move to a part of the world where life was much easier, right? I mean, you can imagine trying to grow food in the desert was not easy. It was a struggle. But if you move to a part of the world where life was much easier, the religious outlook is much different. You go to the South Pacific Islands, which many of us would think was paradise. You could reach out and pick your lunch off of a tree, or go down to the lagoon and catch a fish. How hard was it? There was a totally different worldview. Life was good. Life was for enjoyment. Life was for celebration. So my point with all of this is we have to stop for a moment and recognize that much of what we have been taught in our culture comes from the world view of the pessimists, comes from the world view of the struggle. And it believes in the necessity of struggle, and it makes things that don't need to be a struggle, makes things harder than they need to be, like, for example, a basketball game, because it sees value in that struggle. And what we need to do right here, each and every one of us, is we need to stop and decide, which worldview do you subscribe to? Do you believe that life is good? That God is good? Or do you believe that we are broken and we need to struggle because we are broken? Now, in the East, there's kind of a teaching story that that comes to us from Buddhism. And it says, if you think of a mirror, think of the mirror itself as pure consciousness, pure awareness, the primal mind, the divine mind, the Buddha mind. It is just still. It is just still mirror. And we're even given this symbolism in the book of Revelation. We're told that the throne was surrounded by a lake as still as a mirror, as still as glass. So we have this mirror, and the idea is that this mirror, this pure consciousness, this Buddha mind, this divine mind, this Christ consciousness, called by many terms by many different religions, but it is perfect, it is whole, it is complete, it is good, it is the very goodness of life. But there's dust on the mirror, and that dust represents the human beliefs, the necessity and struggle, the erroneous ideas, the opinions that we have, the opinions that we form, the judgments that we lay down against ourselves and others. So when we try to look to the mirror, our vision is distorted. The image that we see is distorted. We try to look in the mirror to see what life is like, and we get this erroneous impression of what life is like. St. Paul tells us in the New Testament, it's like we're looking through a glass darkly. Right? Looking through a glass darkly. Looking through a dirty window. We're looking through a glass darkly. We're looking at things and we are seeing them through the world view of the necessity of struggle. We're looking through the world view of the pessimism that says, we're broken. We're broken. And because of that, we tend to make things much harder than they need to be. So we want to go back. We just need to come back a little bit to what is this pure consciousness? What is this essence of life? What is this thing that we call God? And remember, the word God is a waypointer. God is not whatever we believe the word God is. God is not the word God. God is much beyond that, beyond the intellect, beyond the ego, beyond the emotions. Something that we cannot understand through thinking. Thinking can tell us that there's something there, but we'll never embrace it with the thinking mind. It is an experience to behold. So in the human experience, in the experience from which our culture primarily comes, human beings are motivated out of need. We need to eat, so we have to grow food in the desert. We need to eat, so we have to go to work so we can buy food at the grocery store. We need to get to work, so we have to buy a car, so we have to make money to buy a car. We need. So our motivation of doing things is this essential struggle, this essential struggle of need. But God doesn't do anything out of need. For what possibly could that which is all-knowing and all-powerful need? What does it lack? It lacks nothing. And this is why the 23rd Psalm says, the Lord shepherds me. I lack nothing. Right? David was stepping into the mystical realm at that point and feeling the presence and feeling part of that which lacks nothing. The Lord shepherds me. I lack nothing. So the divine then when it comes to doing what it does not do it because it has to. How many of us think, oh my God, I got to do that because I have to? I don't want to, but I have to. But the divine creates out of joy, out of the joy of creating, out of the joy of expressing itself through its creation, out of the joy of experiencing itself as its creation, for the sheer fun of it, for the sheer creativity of it. That is why the divine does things, as far as we know. So we step back now and we say, in my life then, when I am making things a struggle that don't need to be a struggle, am I closer to the divine than when I am into expression and creativity and into joy? See, when I'm into the sense of struggle, I am into a place where the divine knows not. This is why we say when you're praying, don't pray to God about things God doesn't know anything about. Don't say, oh God, please take these struggles away from me, because God doesn't know struggle. You see? We have to bring ourselves over into the expression, the experience of joy. We wish to do what we wish to do because it brings more joy into the world as us and through us. So what has happened to us is that we have identified, we have come to believe that struggle is the way that it ought to be, and we have identified with the dust on the mirror instead of the mirror itself. We have identified with the erroneous thoughts and beliefs about struggle, and they are so natural to us that we just fall into them without even thinking about it. And that's the key. Without even thinking about it, we fall into these ideas of struggle. As soon as somebody tells us something, we start thinking about what's wrong with it, what's right with it, how does that fit, all of these things. The news comes on and we see the headline about what happened in the G20 this week, and we start forming opinions about it. And of course they know that, so they give us headlines that are going to cause us to form opinions. We label everything, we judge everything. We try to think of what's good and what's bad. Everything's black, everything's white. And we struggle with it. We're caught up in that. We don't even know that we're caught up in it. So the first thing that we can do is we have to stop identifying with that mindset. We have to be like the jester who can step back and say, well, that's one way of looking at it, but there's another. There's another way of looking at it. What happens if I come around to the other side and look at this thing from the other side? Maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a better way. So one of the first things that we can do is when we start to get caught into the experience, when we start to get caught into, like, anger, for example, when it starts to come up, here's what we do as humans, because we've been taught that life needs to be a struggle. We've been taught that we need to struggle against the things that we believe shouldn't be there. So if we're taught that you shouldn't be angry and then you get angry, you need to struggle with that anger, you see. You can express it. You get mad at somebody, you can go over and punch them in the nose. And we're taught, well, that's not a good thing. Or you can struggle with yourself. That's the human way. You struggle with yourself. And now what you're doing is you're fighting violence with violence, and that's never going to end violence, you see. An eye for an eye leaves everyone blind. So what we need to do is we need to transform it. We need to transcend it. We need to step away from it. We need to recognize it is only the dust on the mirror that we're getting excited about. And it's not worth getting excited about. Jim Morrison and the Doors, one of their albums was titled Nobody Gets Out of Here Alive. And I thought it's an amazing title for a record album. Nobody gets out of here alive. But I want you to think about how serious people have taken all of these little issues that everyone gets upset about. And the people who came before us took them seriously. And the people who came before them took them seriously. And people take themselves seriously. And they get caught up in the struggle, and they're all gone. See, they're all gone. Everything that you worried about yesterday, you're probably not even thinking about today. And everything you worried about 20 years ago, you're probably not worried about anymore today. Everything passes. Everything is impermanent. Everything is turning to dust. Why put so much energy into struggling with that which is going away? Why take it so seriously? So when we start to find ourselves, for example, getting caught up in anger, we identify with the one who is angry. And we project that anger onto another person. And we're stuck, you see. We're stuck in that anger. And what we can do is we can step back one notch. We can say, no, the anger is not me. I am the pure mirror. I am the pure consciousness that exists beneath the anger. The anger is there. I'm not going to struggle with it. I'm not going to box with a shadow. I'm not going to fight with something that's not real. I'm not going to fight with something that's going away. I'm not going to give my energy into struggle. Struggle is ridiculous. But I can acknowledge that it's there. And in that simple act of acknowledging that I am the one observing, I am the witness observing the anger will dissolve. As long as we think I'm angry, the anger will stay. Now, and we like to be right, you know, the intellect likes to be right, the ego likes to win, so we like to be right. We say, but I've got a good reason to be angry. You're identifying with the anger. You're identifying with the one who's angry. So here's a little exercise that I read this morning to try. If, whatever the emotion is, and we're just using anger as the example, whatever the emotion is, imagine it as the clothes that you are wearing. So my clothes are the anger. Take your clothes off. Step out of them. Take the jacket off and throw it on the floor. Get naked. Be the pure consciousness that is not angry. Take the anger and cast it off to the side. And what this is it is just transcending it. It is transforming it. It is letting it dissolve into the nothingness from which it came. The other thing that we can do, and I really like this one, this is kind of like great fun. View the entire drama of human life as if it were a movie. You know, if you go into a movie theater, and Osho tells us this in his book, if you go into a movie theater and instead of watching the movie, you turn around and watch the people, what you find is that people are getting hooked on the drama. They're getting drawn into the drama. This is what the screenwriters try to do. They try to draw us in. We forget that we're sitting in a movie theater watching a movie. And we become engaged in the story. You know, the movies are designed so that we start to identify with the protagonist, the lead character. We become that person. We get caught up in their struggle. And all drama is struggle. There's every drama there is a struggle. In the first 10 minutes, they tell us what the person wants, and then something happens to take them away from it, and they spend the next 3/4 of the movie trying to get back to it. And finally, miraculously, at the end of Act 2, they solve the problem, and they start to get back to their normal life, whatever was normal for them. We get hooked in that. How is he going to solve that problem? What would I do if I were in there? We get in, you turn around, some people are crying and some people are frightened, and everybody is kind of engaged. And it is a movie, you see. It is pictures moving on a movie screen. That's all it is. And if we stop and recognize that the things that we see going on in life are nothing more than a script, nothing more than a drama, nothing more than people who believe and struggle projecting their belief and struggle on the world. That's all it is. So now we don't have to get caught up in it anymore. We don't have to get caught up in it anymore. Once we can do that, once we can look outside of ourselves and do that, then we can look at our own lives. And we can say, I see where I've been hooked on the drama of my own life. I see where I've made things a struggle that didn't need to be a struggle. In fact, I can see that if I wasn't so dedicated and committed to this belief that there needed to be a struggle, I might have actually found an easier way out, a better solution, a happier solution, a solution that brought joy to the world. Because so much of our life is about dominating and winning instead of finding the best solution for everyone. I give you this, try this, and this is from my own life. Next time you have to go into any situation, any negotiation or a business transaction or business dealing, sit with yourself for a few minutes and ask yourself, are you willing to accept whatever is for the highest good of all, no matter what that looks like? You want the best solution for all concerned, not yours. You don't want to go, right? So business is about winning. Go in there and win. You got to get for our company what our company needs. What if we all went in there and said, we're going to get something that's in the best interest of all concerned? What happens when we do that, when we go into a situation with that mindset? We're no longer locked in the struggle of I have to win. Now we're cooperating and we're working towards something that's for the best of all. So when we recognize that life is a drama, and it's a self-imposed drama that was written by screenwriters who were brought up in the belief that life needs to be a struggle, you and I can take a step back and say, no, I'm not like that. I'm a healthy-minded optimist. I'm not like that. And the last technique is a very simple one, which gets back to something we were told thousands of years ago. We just haven't learned how to practice it yet, and it's called just judge not. Just judge not and be not judged. Recognize that each and every other person that you're dealing with is like you. They have the same wants, they have the same needs, they have the same desires. What we tend to do as human beings is if we want it, it's good. If they want it, it's bad. That's what we do. We label other people as bad and us as good, and we all want the same thing. Carl Jung once said that the reason that the Western world was so afraid of communism is that the communists did in public what the Western world only did in secret. They took the very things that we didn't want anybody to know about, and they did them openly. And he says there's a part of us that that wants to pretend that we're not like that. We don't do that. And of course it comes out, with prison camps and renditions and torturing and things like that, that those who we thought were the good guys were doing the same things that the bad guys were doing. The difference is that when we do it, it's understandable and justified, and when they do it, it's not. And if we can get beyond that and say that these are human beings doing this, more alike than different, then we can start to transform it. We can start to transcend it. So what we want to talk about then is we got to have some fun. We got to have some fun as we go along, because it's not meant to be a struggle. It's a struggle because people told us it should be and because we believe them. But we don't have to believe them anymore. We are all adults. We can all make up our own minds. We can all choose what we want to believe. Life was never meant to be a struggle. Don't make it so hard. So if you're trying to work hard at your spiritual growth, don't. Are you trying to work hard at breathing? If you have a medical condition, maybe. But most of us know. Breathing is life, and it comes to us easily and naturally. Our spiritual growth should come to us easily and naturally. Ernest Holmes said if you're doing treatment and you get a headache, you're doing treatment wrong. You're trying to put your willpower into it. You're working too hard. Can we just get up in the morning? Can we just get up in the morning and look at life and say it's good? It's good. The sun has come up this morning. Bless the breakfast that we have to eat by recognizing that it comes to us from that one perfect life. Can we go through the day without getting hooked in the drama, without getting hooked in the struggle? Can we take the time to be still and ignore the dust on the mirror and let our consciousness settle down into the pure consciousness that has never been disturbed, never could be disturbed, never will be disturbed? Don't take it so seriously. It's all turning to dust. But what persists, after all of this has turned to dust, what persists is our consciousness, the pure consciousness, the mirror beyond the dust. So why not take time to get to know that pure consciousness without struggle, without trying to meditate at 90 miles an hour, without working so hard. Express your gratitude, express your joy, express your happiness. When something comes up and somebody tells you you need to worry about it, find the humor in the situation. One easy way to do that is to just exaggerate whatever it is that you're worried about. At some point it'll become so ridiculous that everybody will laugh, There's a story that was told in the East of these two monks who were extremely happy. And they were joking all the time and they were laughing all the time, and everybody else was so serious about this, We have to struggle. We have to struggle for enlightenment. We have to struggle for salvation. We have to struggle to save our souls and all these different things. And they were just cheerful. They were just cheerful and they're happy. You ever notice the statues of the Buddha? Buddha's always smiling and laughing. Happiness, joy. What happens when we connect with the joy? So these two men, they were happy. They were laughing all the time. They were always playing jokes. They were tricksters. They were helping people to see things differently. And they told all of their friends, they said, now when we die, we don't want anyone to prepare our bodies for the funeral. Just carry them directly to the burning grounds and have them put them on the fire and immediately turn them to ashes. And the friends couldn't understand why they wanted that, but they insisted. They said, now when we die, no funeral preparations, just take the body directly to the burning ground and put it on the wood. So sure enough, one day they died, and their friends did as they were instructed. They just carried the bodies down to the burning grounds. In India, they had the burning grounds on the side of the river somewhere. And after the people who worked there lit the funeral pyres underneath these two men, and the flames reached up to their clothes, and their clothes started to burn. Firecrackers started going off. They had loaded the pockets of their garments with firecrackers so that when the day came that they were done with the body and it was carried off to be burned, it would be one last joke, one last trick, one last laugh to let everybody know, don't take it so seriously. It doesn't have to be hard. So I invite you this week, I invite you today, take some time and just ask yourself, just reflect back on your life, Have I aligned with the optimists or the pessimists? And maybe you're not angry now, and you don't want to wait to be angry in the future. Think of a time in the past when you were angry. Call up a memory and then step back from it. And take off the anger like you would take off your clothes. You have been given the power to choose. Do you want to be happy? Or do you want to struggle? Don't make it so hard. God is good. Life is good. Love is good. You are good. You're not broken. You're a beautiful, spiritual being in the process of cleaning the mirror on your consciousness. Get out the rag, get out the Windex. There's something beautiful for you to find. And so it is.